Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, confused, and quietly questioning yourself, even though nothing obvious went wrong? You replay the words, the tone, the moment, trying to figure out how something so small left such a heavy feeling behind. This isn't about blaming or labeling anyone. It's about understanding what happens in certain dynamics, and more importantly, learning how to protect your peace without becoming hard, cold, or reactive. Emotional neutrality is often misunderstood because people hear the word neutral and assume it means being cold, passive, or disconnected. That's not what it is. Emotional neutrality is a deliberate choice about where and how you express your emotional energy, especially in interactions that repeatedly leave you feeling drained, confused, or destabilized. In difficult relational dynamics, emotions become the main currency. Strong reactions, explanations filled with feeling, visible hurt, or urgency often become the focus rather than the actual issue. When this happens, the conversation stops being about resolution and starts revolving around reaction. Emotional neutrality interrupts that shift without escalating it. This doesn't mean you stop having feelings. You still feel anger, sadness, disappointment, or frustration. The difference is that you stop offering those emotions in a space where they are likely to be dismissed, twisted, or used against you. You reserve emotional processing for people and environments that are safe and reciprocal. Many people are conditioned to believe that being understood requires emotional intensity. They explain more, clarify more, and express more, hoping that if they just communicate clearly enough, something will click. Emotional neutrality challenges that belief. It recognizes that clarity does not always come from more emotion, and that some people are not confused, they are simply unresponsive to empathy. When you respond neutrally, your tone is steady, your words are brief, and your focus is practical. You answer what was asked without adding emotional context or personal justification. This can feel uncomfortable at first because it goes against the instinct to defend yourself or repair the interaction in real time. One reason emotional neutrality is effective is because it removes the emotional feedback loop. In many unhealthy patterns, one person reacts and the other responds to that reaction rather than the content. Neutrality gives less material to react to. The conversation either becomes more grounded or loses momentum entirely. It's important to understand that neutrality is not silence, and it's not submission. You are still allowed to say no, to disagree, and to state your position. The difference is that you do it without emotional charge. You don't argue your worth. You don't try to persuade someone to care. This approach also protects your nervous system. High-conflict interactions activate stress responses that linger long after the conversation ends. Emotional neutrality reduces that activation because you are not escalating internally while trying to manage someone else's behavior. Over time, this creates a sense of internal stability rather than constant anticipation. Another key aspect of emotional neutrality is resisting the urge to over-explain. Over-explaining often comes from a fear of being misunderstood or judged unfairly. In certain dynamics, explanations don't bring understanding, they invite scrutiny. Neutral responses limit how much of your inner reasoning becomes open for debate. Neutrality also changes the power balance in subtle ways. When someone expects a strong emotional response and doesn't get one, the interaction feels different. The usual buttons don't work the same way. This isn't about strategy in a manipulative sense, but about stepping out of predictable patterns. People often worry that emotional neutrality will make them seem distant or uncaring. In reality, it usually makes them seem calm and self-directed. You are no longer performing emotional labor to stabilize the interaction. You are simply present without overinvestment. This approach requires internal validation. If you still need the other person to acknowledge your feelings or agree with your perspective, neutrality will feel forced. Emotional neutrality works best when you have already accepted that not everyone will meet you with fairness or insight, and that this does not define your reality. There is also a difference between neutrality and suppression. Suppression is pushing feelings down and pretending they don't exist. Neutrality is acknowledging your feelings privately, while choosing not to express them in a context where they are unlikely to be handled responsibly. That distinction matters for long-term emotional health. In practice, emotional neutrality looks like shorter responses, fewer follow-up explanations, and less urgency to correct misunderstandings immediately. It looks like pauses before replying instead of reacting instantly. It looks like choosing when to disengage rather than pushing through discomfort to keep the peace. Over time, neutrality helps you observe interactions more clearly. When you are not emotionally flooded, you can notice patterns, inconsistencies, and shifts in behavior without personalizing them. This clarity often leads to better decisions about boundaries and distance. It's also worth noting that emotional neutrality does not require the other person's cooperation. You don't announce it. You don't justify it. You simply change your side of the interaction. That's what makes it sustainable and grounded rather than confrontational. Many people discover that once they stop offering emotional intensity, conversations become shorter and less draining. Some interactions fade because they were built primarily on emotional engagement. Others become more functional because the volatility is gone. At its core, emotional neutrality is about self-respect. You recognize that your emotions are valuable and deserve to be handled with care. You stop placing them in environments where they are repeatedly mishandled. You learn that calm is not weakness and restraint is not avoidance. This shift takes practice. At first, it can feel unnatural, even guilty, especially if you are used to being emotionally available in every moment. With time, it becomes a form of self-trust. You begin to feel the difference between engagement and entanglement, and you respond accordingly. Emotional neutrality is not about winning conversations or proving points. It is about preserving your inner balance in situations that previously disrupted it. The more consistently you practice it, the more it becomes a natural extension of how you protect your emotional space without hardening yourself or closing off from healthy connection. Predictable boundaries are not about being rigid or controlling. They are about creating emotional safety for yourself by removing uncertainty from how you respond. Many people think boundaries are something you announce once and then expect others to respect. In reality, boundaries only become real through consistency, not explanation. In difficult relational patterns, inconsistency is often exploited, even unintentionally. When your responses change based on mood, guilt, or pressure, it creates openings for repeated testing. Each time a limit is crossed and then renegotiated, it sends the message that persistence works. Predictable boundaries quietly close that door. A predictable boundary means you already know your response before the situation happens. You don't decide in the moment while emotions are high. You've thought it through when you were calm. That internal clarity makes your response steadier and less reactive, which changes the tone of the interaction without needing confrontation. One of the hardest parts of setting predictable boundaries is letting go of the urge to explain them. Explanations often come from a desire to be understood or seen as reasonable. In certain dynamics, explanations are not received as information, but as material to debate. Predictable boundaries don't require agreement to be valid. When you repeat the same boundary in the same way, something important happens. The interaction becomes boring. There is no new angle to argue, no emotional variation to latch onto. This doesn't mean the other person likes the boundary, but it does mean they begin to understand that pushing won't produce a different outcome. Predictability also helps regulate your own nervous system. When you know how you will respond, you are less anxious going into interactions. You're not bracing yourself for conflict or trying to anticipate every possible reaction. That sense of preparedness reduces emotional fatigue over time. Many people confuse kindness with flexibility. They worry that holding a consistent boundary makes them harsh or uncaring. In reality, predictable boundaries are often the most respectful option. They prevent mixed messages and reduce ongoing conflict. You are not asking the other person to guess where they stand. A key part of predictability is following through. A boundary without follow-through becomes a request. If you say you will disengage from a conversation that becomes disrespectful, you have to actually disengage when it happens. Not angrily, not dramatically, but calmly and consistently. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to managing other people's emotions. You may feel guilty for not softening your response or for not re-entering the discussion to smooth things over. That discomfort is often a sign that you are breaking an old pattern, not doing something wrong. Predictable boundaries also shift responsibility back where it belongs. Instead of monitoring someone else's behavior and trying to correct it, you focus on your response. You don't control what they do. You control what you participate in. That shift alone can be deeply grounding. It's important to understand that predictable boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not threats designed to force change. They are statements of what you will do to protect your time, energy, or emotional well-being. Whether or not the other person adjusts is secondary. Another subtle aspect of predictability is tone. A boundary delivered calmly and repeatedly carries more weight than one delivered with frustration and emotional charge. Over time, the calm repetition communicates seriousness without escalation. Predictable boundaries also reduce internal conflict. When your actions align with your values and limits, you are less likely to second-guess yourself afterward. You don't replay conversations wondering if you should have said more or done less. That internal peace is one of the most underrated benefits. Some people will respond to predictable boundaries by escalating their behavior, at least initially. This can happen when a pattern that once worked no longer does. Recognizing this as a response to change, rather than proof that your boundary is wrong, helps you stay steady. There is also a difference between being predictable and being rigid. Predictability is about your response, not about refusing all flexibility. You can still adjust boundaries over time as circumstances change. The key is that changes are intentional, not reactive. Predictable boundaries make relationships clearer. People either adapt to the structure or drift away from it. While that can be painful, it also brings honesty into your connections. You no longer sustain relationships through constant self-adjustment. This approach teaches others how to interact with you, but more importantly, it teaches you how to trust yourself. Each time you follow through on a boundary, you reinforce the belief that your limits matter. That self-trust becomes the foundation for healthier interactions elsewhere. Over time, predictable boundaries reduce emotional exhaustion. You spend less energy negotiating, defending, or recovering from interactions. Conversations become shorter, decisions become simpler, and your emotional bandwidth increases. At its core, predictable boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about creating conditions where respect is possible. Even if respect doesn't come from the other side, you are still practicing it toward yourself through consistency and clarity. Refusing the role you are being assigned is one of the most subtle shifts you can make, and often one of the most powerful. In many difficult relational patterns, the conflict isn't just about behavior or disagreement. It's about roles. Someone becomes the responsible one, the emotional one, the fixer, the problem, or the one who is always expected to explain themselves. These roles don't appear out of nowhere. They develop slowly through repeated interactions. Over time, you may notice that certain expectations are placed on you without being openly discussed. You're expected to react in a certain way, feel a certain way, or take responsibility for outcomes that aren't actually yours. When you consistently accept a role, even unwillingly, it becomes part of the dynamic. You may find yourself automatically defending, apologizing, or over-functioning, even when you know intellectually that it's unfair. That automatic response is what keeps the pattern in place. Refusing the role doesn't mean confronting or calling it out directly. In many cases, that only reinforces the script. Instead, it means quietly stepping out of the behavior that sustains it. You stop doing what the role requires of you, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. For example, if you've been placed in the role of the one who explains and clarifies, refusing the role means you stop over-explaining. You answer questions simply. You don't justify every choice. You let misunderstandings exist without rushing to correct them. If you've been cast as the emotional one, refusing the role means you regulate your emotions privately rather than performing them publicly. You don't raise your voice to be heard. You don't amplify your feelings to prove their legitimacy. This shift can feel strange because roles often come with a sense of identity. You may have been praised or criticized based on how well you performed them. Stepping out of the role can create anxiety, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that the relationship depends on you staying in it. There is often resistance when you stop playing your part. The other person may try to pull you back into the familiar pattern. They may provoke, dismiss, or redefine the situation in ways that invite your old response. This is not necessarily intentional. It's often a reflexive attempt to restore equilibrium. The key is not to react to that pull. You don't argue about the role. You don't explain why you're changing. You simply respond differently. Over time, the lack of reinforcement weakens the role itself. Refusing the role also requires a shift in how you see responsibility. Many roles are built on misplaced responsibility. You might feel responsible for the other person's emotions, reactions, or sense of control. Stepping out of the role means recognizing where your responsibility actually ends. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or unkind. It means acknowledging that you cannot manage someone else's internal state. When you stop trying, you free up energy that was never meant to be spent that way. Another important part of this process is tolerating discomfort. When you stop performing a role, there is often a period of uncertainty. Conversations may feel awkward. Silences may last longer. You may feel the urge to step in and smooth things over. Sitting with that discomfort is part of the work. This is also where self-observation becomes valuable. You begin to notice when you're being pulled into old behaviors. You pause before responding. You choose not to engage in familiar arguments. That pause creates space for choice instead of reaction. Refusing the role helps restore balance within yourself. You no longer define your worth by how well you manage the dynamic. You stop measuring success by whether the other person is calm, satisfied, or impressed. Your sense of self becomes less dependent on external feedback. Over time, this shift changes how interactions feel. Without the familiar role in place, conversations lose their usual rhythm. Some people adjust and find a new way of relating. Others become frustrated because the old pattern no longer works. Both outcomes provide clarity. It's important to note that refusing a role doesn't require withdrawal from all connection. You can still engage respectfully and thoughtfully. The difference is that you are no longer carrying the emotional or psychological weight that the role demanded. This approach also strengthens your boundaries without requiring constant enforcement. When you stop performing, the boundary becomes implicit. You are no longer available for certain dynamics, and that availability speaks louder than any explanation. Refusing the role is an internal shift first. You decide that you are not obligated to behave in ways that cost you your stability or self-respect. That decision guides your responses more than any external rule. As you practice this, you may notice a growing sense of alignment. Your actions begin to match your values more closely. You feel less fragmented, less reactive, and more grounded in who you are outside the dynamic. In the end, refusing the role is not about rejecting the other person. It's about reclaiming yourself. You step out of the script that was written without your consent and begin responding from a place that feels more authentic and sustainable. Internal validation over external approval is a shift that changes how you experience almost every interaction. For many people, especially in difficult relational dynamics, there is a deep habit of looking outward for confirmation. You want reassurance that your feelings make sense, that your perception is accurate, and that your reactions are justified. Wanting this is human, but relying on it in the wrong context can slowly erode your confidence. When external approval becomes the main reference point, your emotional stability depends on someone else's response. If they agree, you feel steady. If they dismiss or ignore you, doubt creeps in. Over time, this creates a pattern where your sense of reality feels fragile, as if it needs constant reinforcement from the outside. Internal validation begins with recognizing that your experiences are real because you experience them, not because someone else acknowledges them. This doesn't mean you're always right or beyond reflection. It means you stop outsourcing your self-trust to people who have shown that they are inconsistent or unreliable in offering it. One of the hardest parts of this shift is letting go of the hope that clarity will come through explanation. Many people believe that if they just find the right words, the other person will finally understand and respond with empathy. Internal validation accepts that understanding is not something you can force, and that continuing to chase it can keep you emotionally stuck. When you rely less on external approval, you notice a change in how you communicate. You speak more simply. You don't feel the same urgency to persuade or convince. You state your perspective without attaching your worth to whether it is accepted. This doesn't make you closed off, it makes you grounded. Internal validation also changes how you interpret disagreement. Instead of seeing it as a threat to your reality, you see it as a difference in perspective. You no longer feel compelled to resolve every disagreement emotionally. Some differences can exist without needing to be fixed. This shift often brings up discomfort at first. If you've spent a long time seeking validation externally, relying on your own assessment can feel lonely. There may be moments where you second-guess yourself or wish someone else would confirm what you already know. That discomfort is part of building self-trust. Another important aspect of internal validation is separating reflection from self-doubt. Healthy reflection allows you to consider feedback and adjust when necessary. Self-doubt, on the other hand, comes from repeatedly questioning your perceptions because someone else denies or minimizes them. Internal validation helps you tell the difference. When you validate yourself internally, you stop engaging in emotional negotiations. You don't try to earn respect through explanation or patience. You don't wait for permission to set limits. Your actions become less reactive and more intentional. This also reduces emotional exhaustion. Seeking approval requires constant monitoring of the other person's mood, reactions, and signals. When you let go of that, your mental energy returns to you. You become less preoccupied with how you are being perceived and more focused on how you feel and what you need. Internal validation doesn't mean isolating yourself or rejecting all feedback. It means being selective about whose feedback you integrate. You value input from people who are consistent, respectful, and capable of mutual understanding. You stop giving equal weight to every opinion. This shift can change the dynamic of conversations. When you no longer seek validation, discussions become less emotionally charged. You're not trying to extract reassurance or acknowledgement. You're simply expressing yourself and listening in return. There is also a deep sense of freedom that comes with internal validation. You're no longer waiting for someone to get it before you move forward. You make decisions based on your values and observations, not on whether they are approved of in the moment. Over time, this builds emotional resilience. When interactions don't go well, you recover more quickly. You don't replay conversations endlessly, looking for mistakes or missed opportunities to explain yourself better. You trust that you did the best you could with the information you had. Internal validation also supports clearer boundaries. When you trust your own judgment, you don't need elaborate justifications for your limits. You know why they exist, and that knowledge is enough. This reduces the temptation to over-defend or over-justify your choices. As this becomes a habit, your self-talk changes. You become more compassionate toward yourself. Instead of asking, "Was I wrong to feel that way?" you ask, "What does this tell me about what I need?" That shift moves you from self-criticism to self-understanding. The goal of internal validation is not emotional isolation. It's emotional autonomy. You remain open to connection, feedback, and growth, but you are no longer dependent on another person's response to feel secure in your own experience. In the end, internal validation is about reclaiming authority over your inner world. You recognize that while relationships matter, your sense of reality does not require constant external confirmation to be valid. Strategic distance is often misunderstood as avoidance or withdrawal, but it's actually about intention. It's the decision to be more deliberate about how much access someone has to your thoughts, emotions, and inner life. You're not disappearing. You're recalibrating how close you stand to something that has been affecting you. In many difficult dynamics, closeness happens without choice. You share details automatically. You explain your feelings in real time. You react quickly because the emotional pull feels urgent. Strategic distance interrupts that automatic closeness and replaces it with awareness. This kind of distance starts internally. Before you change anything outwardly, you notice how much mental space the interaction occupies, how often you replay conversations, how much energy you spend anticipating reactions. Strategic distance begins when you decide that not every thought or feeling needs to be shared or resolved immediately. One of the most important parts of strategic distance is reducing emotional disclosure. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or guarded with everyone. It means recognizing that some people don't handle emotional information responsibly. When you share less, there is simply less material available to be misunderstood or misused. Mental distance is just as important as emotional distance. Even if you're still in regular contact, you can choose not to engage internally in the same way. You stop analyzing every word. You stop searching for hidden meanings. You take interactions more at face value instead of trying to decode them. This shift often feels strange at first because many people are used to closeness being measured by intensity. When intensity drops, it can feel like something is wrong. In reality, you may just be experiencing a more regulated, less consuming form of engagement. Strategic distance also involves slowing down your responses. Immediate replies often come from habit, not intention. Pausing before responding gives you time to decide whether engagement is necessary or helpful. That pause alone can change the direction of an interaction. Another aspect of strategic distance is limiting access to your emotional reactions. You may still feel upset, disappointed, or frustrated, but you process those emotions privately or with trusted people instead of in the moment with someone who tends to escalate or dismiss them. This doesn't make you emotionally unavailable. It makes you emotionally selective. You're choosing environments where your feelings are more likely to be received with care rather than conflict. Strategic distance also helps you see patterns more clearly. When you're too close, everything feels personal and urgent. With a bit of space, you can observe behavior without immediately internalizing it. That observation leads to clearer decision-making. Some people worry that creating distance will provoke negative reactions. That can happen, especially if the relationship has relied heavily on constant engagement. Strategic distance doesn't require explanation. You don't need to announce that you're pulling back. You simply adjust your behavior. It's also important to understand that distance doesn't have to be permanent or absolute. It can be situational. You might be more distant around certain topics or during emotionally charged moments, while still engaging normally at other times. This flexibility is what makes the approach sustainable. You're not cutting yourself off from connection. You're choosing when and how connection happens. Over time, strategic distance can reduce emotional volatility. Interactions become shorter and more focused. There's less back and forth, less escalation, and fewer emotional spikes. That calm can feel unfamiliar if you're used to intensity, but it often brings relief. Another benefit is that distance protects your sense of identity. When you're deeply entangled, it's easy to lose track of your own perspective. Distance gives you room to think independently, without constant external influence shaping your reactions. Strategic distance also supports boundaries without constant enforcement. When you're less available, there are fewer opportunities for boundaries to be tested. Your behavior communicates limits more clearly than repeated explanations ever could. This approach requires self-trust. You have to trust that you don't need to stay fully engaged to be responsible or kind. You can care without overexposing yourself. You can be present without being consumed. There may be moments of guilt, especially if you're used to being highly responsive. That guilt often comes from old expectations, not from anything you're doing wrong. Sitting with that feeling instead of reacting to it is part of maintaining distance. Strategic distance also creates emotional breathing room. You have more space to notice how interactions actually affect you. Instead of pushing through discomfort, you pause and assess whether continued engagement aligns with your well-being. As this becomes a habit, your energy starts to return. You're less drained after conversations. You're less preoccupied with managing someone else's reactions. Your focus shifts back to your own life, interests, and priorities. Distance doesn't mean coldness, it means discernment. You're not shutting down emotionally. You're choosing not to place your emotional world in situations where it has repeatedly been strained. With time, strategic distance feels less like a technique and more like a natural boundary. You instinctively know when to step back, when to engage, and when to let things unfold without your involvement. It becomes easier to recognize that not every interaction requires depth, resolution, or emotional investment. Some things can remain surface level without harming your integrity or compassion. The goal was never to change someone else. The goal was to change how much access they have to your time, energy, and emotional world. That shift alone can bring clarity, calm, and a sense of control that doesn't depend on anyone else's awareness or approval. In the end, the strongest position you can take is not reaction, argument, or explanation. It is self-respect practiced consistently. And from that place, peace becomes something you maintain, not something you chase.